Hi, I'm Dr. Sam Hazledine, founder of MedWorld, and today I'm interviewing Dr. Tahnee Bridson. Now, Tahnee was recently awarded the 2022 Queensland Young Australian of the Year for her work as founder of Hand in Hand Peer Support, which is a free and confidential peer support network or program for health workers in Australia and in New Zealand. And obviously something that we, going through a pandemic, need now more than ever. It fosters a culture in the medical profession in which mental health is valued and help can be sought without fear or shame. Again, a shift in culture that we so need. Tahnee's a psychiatry registrar, and she's passionate about improving the well-being of doctors and of medical students. So it's really great to be here and be talking to her. So welcome, Tahnee.
Thank you very much for having me.
Absolute pleasure. Look, let's before we get into talking about Hand in Hand peer support, which is such an amazing initiative, and firstly congratulations as well for Queensland Young Australian of the Year. I'd love to know first a little bit about you and why you chose this profession. Why did you choose to become a doctor?
It's a good question. I think I growing up in a small country town in far north Queensland, both of my parents came from backgrounds where they didn't get to finish school. So my dad was from the bush and grew up on like a cattle station. And then my mum was an immigrant from Italy. So she came to Australia not speaking a word of English, and her parents not speaking a word of English, and then obviously went to an all English speaking school and, had a lot of, it's something I guess we don't really think of, but there was a lot of sort of racism towards the Italians and the Greeks and the Spanish back in the 60s and 70s when they came over. And so she never finished high school. My dad never finished high school, and but obviously, they would have liked to have done that kind of thing. And when I went to school, I went to the same high school that they did, and I guess everyone in that town kind of knows everyone. And so having two parents who didn't, get to have a complete education and who hadn't gone to university often meant that there was a lot of this kind of idea from people that you wouldn't be able to achieve anything, or you wouldn't, you weren't the kind of person who was smart enough to finish high school or, do well at school or have a academic or university career. And I guess I really kind of fought against that. It took its toll, but I really wanted to, I guess, prove that I could do something and, that kind of fight that stigma that my parents had gone through and that I'd also gone through as a kid. And I ended up doing, despite all odds, doing well at school. And I guess there's this kind of thing that if you do well at school, people sort of think that you'll be like a doctor or a lawyer or, something along those lines. So initially, I don't think I was 100% set on medicine. I think I just had in my brain that because I'd done well, that was sort of maybe what I had to do. But then down the track, I guess I kind of had the same sort of things happen at uni where I was the country kid, my parents weren't doctors. There was this, I always had this feeling that I wasn't good enough. I was an imposter. But I was always really striving to do my best and to do well. And during my final year of exams, I took on some extra projects, and I had a supervisor who was, I guess, quite harsh and, your kind of typical medicine doctor that you see in the movies, or you hear about the, yep. the supervisor or the consultant who's quite mean and, critical.
And the Dr. Cox off Scrub type person.
Exactly. Dr. Cox off Scrubs. And, I think because of my upbringing and where I'd come from, I had this idea that I kind of had to prove people wrong, or, I wouldn't give up. I always wanted to keep going. So when people were quite harsh to me or, critical of me, I wanted to kind of work harder so that I could get it right. And there was this kind of like, most people have this breaking point, right? And I just kind of pushed through that breaking point to the point where I got really unwell. And one day I was at uni and I ended up collapsing and getting sent to ED. And obviously, this is like a small hospital, or a smaller hospital than the
Mm.
cities. You kind of work in the hospital that you get sent to if you're unwell. Um,
Yeah.
and they ended up, you know, the doctors came around and they ended up telling me that, or diagnosing me with anorexia nervosa, which, I'd never even, I don't know, I'd never even thought that there was, I hadn't even thought about mental illness or psychiatry or anything. It just kind of didn't cross my mind. But going through that,
Mm.
um, and then I guess I started to realize the importance of mental health. And it was kind of the tipping point where, at first, when I was diagnosed, I just hated everyone and everything in psychiatry. And, I just wanted to run as far away as I could. But um, as I started kind of learning more, and I had a really good mentor who was a psychiatrist, and kind of showed me that you could do all these extracurricular things without having a consultant or a supervisor around you who kind of wanted to make you cry every day. And I realized that actually psychiatry was a really nice profession with really nice people, and that actually you could do a lot of really good work in it, and there was still so much unknown about mental illness and why things happened, or how to fix them. And so that kind of drove me into the psychiatry world. um, Bit of a long-winded
Yeah.
story,
And has that,
but
no, sure. Has that personal experience been valuable for you as a psychiatrist?
yeah, I think, you know, I mean, I don't really talk about it when I'm at work or when I'm with patients. And up until the Australian of the Year award, I hadn't ever actually spoken about it or, revealed it. I was always really conscious because a lot of people would tell you that, as a doctor, you can't have an illness and you can't let people know that you've been unwell because you'll be stigmatized. And that, people would say, especially in psychiatry, if you're somebody who has an illness, you definitely shouldn't tell your colleagues because they'll judge you and all this sort of stuff. So I kept it quiet for a really long time. And then when I was awarded the Queensland Young Australian of the Year and they wanted me to tell my story and they do this filming and stuff, it's kind of, they said the more human you can be, the better it is. And, we want to inspire people. We want to like tell people how you got to this point. And that was kind of when I decided I would, I guess, open up a bit more. But it was like a really difficult day doing that filming because you have to say your story over and over so they can film all different angles. And, yeah, that was like
Yeah, right.
probably the hardest because I'd never said it in public to begin with. And then to be having to say it like 10 million times so they can film it 10 different ways, was a challenge. But I just sort of thought, I'm doing all this work to support doctors and healthcare workers, and I'm advocating that we should get help. And I've now been given this platform. I need to show people as well that it's okay to speak up. So, yeah, I think in clinical practice it does help because I can often understand where people are coming from. Um, so it probably
Mm.
helps me in terms of talking to the patients or, understanding where they're coming from. But, people still get upset and people still have the same reactions that I did. And um, I can't really stop that, but I guess I can just be a bit more empathetic towards what they're going through. So, yeah.
Yeah. Isn't that an interesting situation though? That it took becoming an Australian of the Year for you to feel confident enough to share that story, and you're in that. And, I'm not. This is not judgment. You're in that space. You understand how important it is, and still it's hard. I mean, it just goes to show just how difficult it is for health professionals to actually admit any form of vulnerability, really, isn't it?
Yeah, I also thought the same. That it took something like that for me to actually open up was kind of astounding, even though we were doing all this work and, we were trying so hard to provide this support service for healthcare workers. The fact that I couldn't open up about my own experience until something like that was just, it's sad to think that there is so much stigma and, I still, I guess, have people who probably think that I shouldn't have opened up or I shouldn't have told my story, and and who still think that there are parts of my story or specifics and things that could be useful to other people that they still sort of think I shouldn't be saying, or it's, I don't know
Yeah.
why our profession has so much stigma towards, like, we make it so hard for each other to get help. I think it comes from the
Yeah.
profession itself too. I don't know if it's, the outside world telling us this. I feel like a lot of the time it's our own kind of colleagues who are, making us feel like this.
Yeah, and it's interesting as well, like in this day and age, because it's a sort of a silent culture, that even when you're an advocate for something, you're still influenced by it, and out loud, where everyone's saying vulnerability is a strength, and we need to open up. It's easy to say all those things, but then when it comes to actually doing it as a doctor, it's quite a different story, isn't it? Or it can be quite a different story.
Yeah. Even just, I
So,
think,
so
like, saying that you've been bullied, for instance, me saying how I had a supervisor who, obviously in some way contributed to, me becoming unwell. Even that is like, people tell you that you shouldn't say that kind of stuff. Even just that one little piece of your story, people think you shouldn't be talking about being bullied, or, all of this sort of stuff. You have to keep it secret. And I've even had friends who've, had difficult supervisors or difficult experiences in the workplace, and then they've sort of got advice from people who have said, no, you shouldn't speak up about this because it'll impact your career and you'll never get to do, like,
yeah,
what you want to do.
yeah, it's something that clearly needs to change. I think it's interesting. I don't think anyone disagrees that it needs to change. It's just that we keep sort of feet walking in one direction and actions go in the other. I mean, it probably, I imagine it somehow impacted how you saw the need for the peer-to-peer support. So tell me about that. Tell us about hand-in-hand peer support. How you saw a need for that peer support within the profession, and what made you sort of take the step into establishing it.
I think one of the big things was when I was, first really unwell, I felt incredibly alone. And I guess in a way I was, well, maybe intentionally, maybe not, but I was made to kind of feel like I was the only person who could kind of be going through something like this in medicine as a med student or a doctor. And, I was completely isolated from my peers and, given this kind of spiel that I wasn't going to be able to finish medicine, I wasn't going to be able to be a doctor. And there was just no one around me really, other than, people that I got to know after this, that kind of told me otherwise, And so I really had to fight tooth and nail to, just give it my all and give it a go against all odds. And it wasn't till I actually finished medicine and, was kind of out of that situation that I realized I most certainly wasn't the only person going through it. Like, I wasn't the only person who had ever had an illness or a mental illness. And, that same year we lost a GP in my hometown. And, being a small town, everyone knows the doctors, and they've probably looked after you and your grandparents and your parents.
Yep.
And one of the doctors in my hometown ended their life by suicide. And I think that was also a big kind of light bulb moment where I really sort of started to realize it wasn't that, we were alone in this fight. It's just that people didn't talk about it, and people, there wasn't any sort of supports available for those of us who were going through it. And I had that in my mind for, a few years, and then was trying to sort of see what we could do, to improve things for doctors. And then when COVID came along and we were seeing what was happening overseas, there were healthcare workers who were sleeping like on the hallways, and there were senior doctors who I think there was a senior doctor in New York who suicided. That was when I kind of reached out to a few of my colleagues and mentors and said, should we be doing something? Shouldn't we be doing something to support our colleagues the healthcare workers here, so that we don't end up with the same things happening? And yeah, we looked around, my colleagues were like, surely there's something. And I was like, well, I don't think there is, And, we, of course, realized there wasn't anything available for us. And yeah, it kind of just, we put out this idea on social media, and, had about 400 people kind of respond to us in 24 hours saying that it was a really good idea. And it kind of just took off from there and has kind of had a life of its own since there. But yeah, I guess I always thought that having something like that would have been really helpful for me, and maybe it would have been helpful for, my family GP at home who, you never know, but just thinking whether something like this could have made a change to other people who we haven't been able to help or save in our profession, I think was a big kind of driver.
Absolutely. And how have you found, in terms of, you've trained in medicine, but scaling an organisation is quite different. How's that experience been for you?
I think you realise.
And tell me, and give me an idea of some of the scale. Like how many people have engaged, and yeah.
I think you realise that you know nothing about like business or running an organisation, or you kind of have some leadership skills, but the whole like business side of things, or just like forming an organization, all the logistics, my god, I had no idea. It's not something that I learnt in med school or in school. So I really had to rely on other people to sort of help us, people with more skills or more experience in that area to help us. And lots of goodwill from people. So, my tax accountant in Cairns, who's my dad's tax accountant, helped us put together the paperwork initially for the non-for-profit. And, I had cousins down here who do accounting and things who helped with the business kind of stuff, because it's just, I had no clue. But we've been really lucky that we've got an amazing group of volunteers who, a lot of whom have been with us from the very beginning in 2020. They volunteered to help, I guess, build hand in hand and, get it to where it is now, and, kind of build the organization. But then we've also had, hundreds of people volunteer to actually sort of facilitate and run peer support groups, which is really important because obviously we need people to, run the groups as well. We've had hundreds of people sign up for peer support over the last few years as well. And so some of those have been getting peer support since we started, which is really lovely. They've continued this whole time. Some of them have had shorter bouts of peer support, maybe for something that was a specific issue, or, during the few COVID lockdowns, some groups came to us specifically for that, on how to manage. But the response is just, it's been overwhelming, and we've had, I guess the social media is like one side, but we've also had like a lot of people kind of join us on our Facebook group chat, which is kind of like a open peer support group for anyone that's there. And yeah, it's we did this workshop last week with kind of our core members. We've got about sort of 20 people that have been there from the beginning, sort of thing, and have really helped the organization grow. And we did a strategic planning kind of meeting last Saturday, and we kind of like looked back at where we were this time last year, and then like looked at what we've got to this year. And I think often you don't stop and think. You're kind of just, well, I don't know, for me anyway, I'm just kind of running, always thinking of, making sure that we're doing X, Y, Z, making sure that we're, getting everyone the support they need, doing all that kind of hands-on stuff. And you don't often kind of sit back and look at what you've been able to do over that time. And it was really nice just for an hour to kind of sit down as a team and see how far we'd come and how much we'd been able to kind of, hopefully how many people we'd been able to help over that time. And, just coming from like 3 or 4 people who had this idea, listening to little old me to where we are now, it's kind of, I don't know, it's kind of like what does Kim call it? One of my colleagues calls it my brainchild. So it's kind of like looking at my own little child like flourish.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's more than that, as I see. I mean, you've sort of created a movement of support, haven't you? Because it's people pitching in, and I think that's something that's so strong within our profession is we all know we're struggling. I did some research recently and on a cohort of people. 1 and 2 were in burnout pre-COVID. We're up to 2 and 3 are in burnout now. Now, burnout is a very wide-ranging term, which no doubt includes, it's a spectrum, and mental illness is going to be, a part of that spectrum. But we're struggling. We're hurting as a profession, but the thing what I find really heartening is even though we are hurting and 2 and 3 of us are struggling. There's a real feeling that people want to help, that people want this to change. Like there's a new generation of doctors coming through, and not just a new generation, but there's like of all ages. There's a new cultural shift coming through. We can't just tolerate this anymore, don't you think?
Yeah.
Like we want to make a difference.
I really feel like our generation and the generation of med students that are coming through, it's more now than just us talking about it and saying things need to change. I think we're all looking for ways to actually make the change happen, because we're kind of sick of seeing this same thing repeated over and over and over again. And the Dr. Cox culture, we've all encountered at least one of them in our profession. I don't know how many Dr. Coxes I've encountered since being a med student and a doctor, and we're all in the same boat. And I think the difference is now that instead of just accepting it and kind of then thinking, oh, well, we'll treat our interns or our med students the same, is that we're thinking, no, this actually needs to change because it's having a massive impact on the health of our colleagues. And, it's so like badly or underreported, the number of like healthcare worker and doctor suicides. You see it. I feel like when we're, as doctors, we often see it, like how many people, or, we see every time somebody ends their life. But it's like, I don't know if like the rest of the world kind of acknowledges or even knows that this is an issue. And, now it's, I guess, obviously become a bit more prominent in the media because of COVID and stuff. But even so, it still feels like the wider population doesn't realize like how much pressure or, how much the healthcare workers of the world are actually struggling. We're still sort of like fighting this battle to be heard.
No, I don't think there's a lot of understanding at all. And I think if you go pre-COVID, 1 and 2 were in burnout, 2 and 3 now, I mean, there's never been a more difficult time to be a doctor. Not only, with the increased stresses and pressures, of dealing with COVID, but there's never been a more hostile environment to be a doctor either.
Yeah.
Both online and offline, but particularly online.
Yeah.
Like, and you can turn the other cheek and you can ignore it, but it's just so constant that it's just kind of like it's got to be chipping away at so many doctors, and making doctors question, I guess, themselves and the impact they have, and even what they're doing at times.
Yeah. I mean, I've had friends recently who've taken time off medicine because they're just, they're just like, what are we doing? There are other
Done.
careers out there
Done.
that, they see their friends and their family who are doing things other than medicine and who are happy and having a life. And, then we're kind of expected, or, there's this idea that we sacrifice everything for, to be a doctor. And it's just, I don't think people are willing to do that anymore. And it's just getting harder to make those sacrifices, especially with COVID.
Yeah. I mean, you're part of that next generation of doctors ushering in a change. And you doing that through hand-in-hand peer support. What else? What else do you think needs to happen? What else is important for us to shift this culture of medicine from one where there's the idea that I sacrifice everything for my patients, to more of an idea, I guess, of my patients are important and so am I. Which comes first? It's kind of like the car or the oil. You need both.
Yeah.
Like how what do you think needs to happen for that shift to happen?
Yeah, it's like really complicated because I guess I've been involved in like lots of chats where we've tried to think about how we could start making these small sort of changes towards a bigger picture, with the AMA and with Hand in Hand and Doctors' Health and all of that kind of stuff. And I think like providing the services is one part. I think with Hand in Hand, our idea is that we're hoping to catch people early, before they're really unwell, before they kind of fall off that cliff. Providing them peer support in our eyes is a way to actually prevent people from getting to the point of burnout or, getting really unwell.
Yep.
Obviously, we also need the services at the bottom of the cliff to catch people who are unwell, because not everyone's going to come to us or, be able to get help early. But then there's also the kind of systemic issues, like how do we get rid of bullying and discrimination, and, how do we start to actually like address those things in the workplace that chip away at you day in, day out, and, that even sometimes will stop you from getting help because you just don't have time or don't have the energy to reach out. So there's that kind of,
Sure.
How do we address bullying and make it, we're never going to get rid of it fully because it comes from all angles, but how do we kind of help with that? And I think a lot of the time, especially at the moment where everyone is overworked and people are leaving and going to different states, and, every single health service is overworked and there's not enough staff. I think little things like, how many times do you not get a lunch break? Like, I know, this week on 2 days, I wasn't going to get a lunch break or any break at all, because there's just so much demand. And I'm somebody who's not really good at standing up, and I think a lot of us aren't really good at sort of putting our foot down and being like, no, we need time to at least have, a 5-second drink of water and have something to eat or use the bathroom or whatever. But, I just feel like we need to be making that standard. Like, it wouldn't be acceptable in any other job or any other profession to not have a break in like a 9 or 10 hour day or an 8-hour day or whatever.
No.
Like, it's just not okay. And then
No.
actually,
and even with medicine, It's really only
Exactly,
I
right?
was going to say, even within medicine, it's really only doctors who do that.
Exactly.
Like the nurses have got it sorted. They have lunch break.
Exactly.
Yeah,
And there's this idea that there's not as many of us, and so we kind of hold the we have all these patients that we are responsible for, and so we can't afford to take breaks or we don't have time, but it's like it's not sustainable. It's part of the reason that everyone's starting to burn out, because there's just we don't have the time to sort of breathe or have space to think even, and then it leads to things like errors or clinical
yeah,
mistakes because you're not actually feeding yourself or sleeping or whatever it is. So I think simple things like that, I don't know how we change it, but that should just be a given. And getting paid for overtime, lots how many people don't get paid for overtime, or work weekend shifts and don't get paid, or work the on call the night before, and then
yeah,
as long as they're home within 7 or 8 hours or whatever, still come to work the next day. There's just like all these
yeah, yeah.
little things
I
that
think
can,
you're right. Yeah, stack up, don't they? They
yeah,
stack up. You're absolutely right with that. I think there's that. It's funny. I remember when I was, working as a doctor, and you could often tell the locum doctors because they were happy because they were getting paid for the time. They were still working longer hours, but they're getting paid for all the hours that they were working. And just that simple shift meant they didn't feel undervalued.
yeah,
Um, and it's but it's making it's I guess that's it, isn't it? It's actually going, you can say words are one thing, but actions are another. You've got to actually show doctors that they're valued. And how do you do that? You pay them for all the time that they're working. You actually, mandatory breaks, things like that. Like there's some things you can do that are really, really simple. And then obviously even more upstream is, we need more staffing. It's very hard to create these conditions when you're chronically understaffed and working at 120% of capacity already, and then you throw COVID on top of it. So there are some things, but I mean those are bigger changes. But simple changes like you're valued. How would I show that you're valued? Well, I'll pay you and I'll give you lunch break. It's really not that difficult.
yeah. And I think when you just hit the nail on the head too. I think there's a lot of like, what's the word, kind of moral injury as well, because we are that sort of caring profession where we want to be able to help all of the people coming to us for help. And often at the moment, the level for people to get to see us, or the level to get care, or the level to, the waits for surgery and things like that are so long, or we're not able to see people because the cutoffs are so much higher than they used to be, that I think sometimes that also affects us, because obviously there's not enough staff, and um, we're trying to do the best job that we can, or that we, trying to do the best we can, but we know that we're not doing the best job, and it's not really our fault. It's more of like a systemic issue, but I think often we take it on as well. And then that also contributes to the whole not taking breaks, you know, not looking after
Yeah.
ourselves as well. Um, I went to the Crazy Socks for Docs breakfast in Adelaide,
Oh,
and
yeah.
one of the junior doctors there was saying that, in the peak of COVID, um, their hospital decided that a good way to sort of thank people was to put bowls of fruit um, in the doctor's lounge, or, around the hospital, um, which, you know, they felt was really out of touch, because
Yeah.
all of the doctors were dressed in full PPE and, weren't able to actually stop and eat something. And, it just showed like how out of touch the kind of management was compared to the people on the floor doing it tough.
Yeah. 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 It's sort of it's lip service to your valued. I'll give you a free piece of fruit that you can't eat because it's covered in COVID, as opposed to going, you're working longer. I'm just going to pay you for the time you're working. That would be the simple way to say you're valued, wouldn't it? Really? Yeah. So if
Yeah.
there's doctors listening and they're struggling, or doctors listening who who feel like they actually want to get involved with Hand in Hand and be a peer support, how would they go? How would each of those groups of doctors go, or individuals go about doing that?
So we have a website. You can just Google us, Hand in Hand Peer Support. And on there you can sign up to get peer support. There's like a little, you don't have to put in full details if you don't want to, but just like a name, what area of practice you're kind of in and what you're looking for. And then the same goes for people who are wanting to volunteer. They can fill in the, I want to be a facilitator form. And they can also just email us. So I think our email address is on the website, but I can give it to you to put up on with the podcast as well. So they can just send us an email and say, look, we're interested in helping. If they don't really know how they want to help, and we're always really keen to get more volunteers. One of the big things I feel really bad about is that, we rely so heavily on volunteers because we've traditionally been a grassroots, unfunded initiative. We are all doing this in our spare time, volunteering. So I personally and our whole team, we really value all the volunteers that we get. And I think, down the track, if we were able to still be doing this and, get, I guess, a bit more recognition or funding, we'd love to be able to actually thank our volunteers and turn them from volunteers into, actual kind of, be giving them something in return, because again, it falls back into that as healthcare workers or doctors, we do so much that's volunteer or unpaid, and I don't know, I really want the people that are with our team to feel valued, and I love the culture that we have in Hand at the moment, because we all work so well together and we all look after each other, and we all are really grateful for the work that everyone does. So I just want to make sure that we continue that and that we can, really show our volunteers how much we appreciate the work that they do.
Oh, no doubt, because they're, they're obviously, they're the lifeblood of what you're doing, aren't they?
Yeah.
Giving their time, which is, for doctors, it's one of the most scarce resources they actually have.
Exactly.
Yeah. So, I like to finish with this question, but if you could go back in time and speak to your 18-year-old self, it's not as far back in time for you as it is for others of us, what would you say are the three most important things? What are the three most important pieces of advice that you would give young Tahnee?
It's a good question. I think 18-year-old me was pretty similar to me, but I think was just a lot more unconfident and like a lot more self-doubting, and probably felt like she didn't really belong in the university or medicine world. I think I would probably just tell her to have more confidence in herself, to stop thinking that, she has to get 100% in an exam in order to be worthy. You don't have to. Everyone always used to tell me P's get degrees, and I didn't ever believe that. But I know you have to do your best, but I just think you don't have to kill yourself over it. I think I would also tell her to have a bit more fun. I think it's really important for us, especially as doctors, that, I don't know, in uni, I thought uni was like the be all end all, and I thought med school was like make or break, and I had to do well, or, was the end of the world. And then once I did well at uni or whatever, then I was free. It was all uphill from there. But no one really, if you don't come from a medical background, or, people don't really tell you that actually it only gets harder once you graduate and actually get to being a doctor. And that actually uni and high school is probably like, the time where you can have more fun. And so I definitely would have told myself to make the most of those years, because now a few years down the track from finishing uni, and I feel like I didn't make the most of my kind of uni life.
Yeah, right. To go back in time and just say, hey, in future you're going to have to do the same amount of study, but also work 60 hours a week.
Exactly.
So, So you've got it pretty good. Like, actually enjoy it. Enjoy it. Like, and isn't that something so often in life? You've actually just got to go, actually, I've got it pretty good. And you can, and that's kind of the way to enjoy it. And is there one more thing, or was it we're gonna two? We're gonna go for three. You can just have two if you want.
I
mean,
think
you can.
yeah, I think that's my main thing is,
I like it.
yeah. And I would probably,
I think that's good. Young Tahnee would have been like, I have to get 3 out of 3. 2 out of 3 is totally fine for older
yeah,
Tahnee.
exactly.
Whatever. No big deal. I love it. I love it. I love it. Look, well, I mean, the thing is, you've talked about imposter syndrome. You've talked about not being enough. I mean, all right, Young Australian of the Year. At some point, you're going to have to put that one to rest, I think. And maybe Australian of the Year could be that turning point, that inflection point for you. What do you think?
Oh, I think.
Or by next year, will you be like, oh, it's only Young Australian of the Year? There's still Australian of the Year again. I mean, I say that jokingly, but this is the funny thing about, with doctors and, like, the fact that anyone even gets into medical school, that, you've got to be the absolute top of your game to get in. Just getting through medical school, whatever training program you do or don't get onto, like, we're in this little microcosm of a world where, and for training programs as well, we're competing against the best of the best. And so, some training programs, got a 30% getting, admission, you get your pass rates or whatever for, part ones or whatever it is. But the reality is this is within the top 1 of 1%. So it's really important, I think, just to iterate that to doctors that you're already in the absolute top in terms of academics, in terms of a socially conscious career, in terms of what you give and put in. Like, there is nothing beyond it.
Yeah.
And,
yeah. I agree. I think actually one of the other things I would say is hang out with, like, your family and people who aren't in medicine, because I think sometimes we get caught up in the bubble of medicine, and all you're doing is talking medicine and exams and study, and you just get sucked into this world that is only medicine. And I think sometimes it's so important to have people outside of this world to be like, oh yeah, actually medicine is strange, and like, there are other things out there, and there is a whole world out there, that other people live in that we seem to forget about.
Yeah, doctors are a weird bunch with a dark sense of humor. Have you noticed the magic phenomenon, of the 3-doctor phenomenon? Like, 2 doctors within a group, you can still talk about normal. As soon as you get to 3 doctors, all you'll do is talk about medicine. It's like a tipping point.
Yeah.
I think that's great advice. There's a whole world outside of it, even though it feels like a whole world, because as doctors, we spend a lot of time, we put so much into it. And finally, Tahnee, I mean, you've got a long way to go, you've got a lot to give, no doubt. But how do you want to be remembered? How do you want people to think of you?
I don't know. I don't know. I always think that I like to be someone who's, like, ready to help other people, whether they're friends or colleagues or, even people that I might not know. So I think it's something that's important to me, being a helpful, caring person. So I think that's probably how I'd like to be remembered. Just probably very, like, medicine.
I think you're right. You're doing that on. You're doing that on a grand scale. I mean, with Founding Hand in Hand Peer Support, it's a way to take, that one-to-one helping people to actually help to enable other people to help people, because I think there's a lot of people in medicine like you who we just want to help our colleagues out. And I think, that's one of the special things about our profession, is that collegiality, and we're a gang and we're pretty tight. And I think there's something pretty, you meet another doctor and you've got an instant connection. You don't have to talk about it, but we've all been through similar things. We've all made good decisions and saved lives, and but we've also all made bad decisions as well that have harmed people and cost lives, and made decisions that have, we've not been able to sleep over. We've been through all that. We don't have to talk about it, because the moment you say you're a doctor, it's like, I get you. And I think that's part of why, your hand-in-hand peer support is so important. A team of life coaches is not what we need. What we need is doctors helping doctors. And I think that's why what you're doing is so meaningful and so special. So, look, well, thank you so much. I've loved talking to you. I think, there's a few things that really stood out for me. I think, having the courage and actually acknowledging that it takes, how much courage it takes to stand up and speak out and admit, fallibility, the challenge. Shouldn't even call it that, but just admit that, mental health or your own challenges. I think it's really important for anyone listening. I think the other piece that really hit home for me is just how not alone anyone going through this is. And I think your hand-in-hand peer support is just such a great organisation to help people realise that. And then the other piece that really hit home for me, I think, is in terms of how we drive change, is just this concept of making sure that doctors and healthcare workers feel valued, and then actually making sure our actions, as our systemic actions, go hand in hand with that. Because I think that those are some really important points. So look, I really enjoyed talking to you. I think congratulations on what you've started. I'm sure it's only just beginning. Look, I just wish you all the very best. I'm sure any doctor listening has got a lot of value out of it. Maybe they'll be going to the website and being giving that support or receiving that support, and both are equally as important. So thank you so much.
Thank you.